The planet Ardentis was burning. It had been burning for 6 days. Not 6 rotations. Not 6 isolated strikes. 6 full days of continuous bombardment. From orbit, the fires carved glowing arteries across the night side of the world, rivers of orange cutting through continents that had once shimmered blue and silver. Entire cities were now heat signatures. The Western Hemisphere glowed like a dying coal. From the observation deck of Conclave Command Station Helier, the planet looked less like a world and more like a wound. 2 billion lives had called Ardentis home. On the first day of the siege, evacuation fleets had attempted atmospheric extraction. The second day, orbital defenses had fallen. On the third, the Verican armored divisions had tried a counteroffensive. They had lasted 9 hours. On the fourth day, the Saruan artillery grids had activated their planet-wide barrier arrays. The barrier had held for 11 minutes. On the fifth day, the cities began to burn in earnest. By the sixth, the word defense had become theoretical. The enemy did not rage. It did not boast. It did not broadcast threats. It simply advanced. The Dominion fleets maintained perfect formation above the atmosphere, vast carriers like obsidian continents drifting in geometric alignment. Their siege engines fired in measured intervals. No wasted energy. No dramatic overkill. Just systematic dismantling. They had been doing this for 600 years. Inside the Helier command chamber, no one spoke for a long time. The chamber was circular, tiered, and lined with hololithic projectors displaying live feeds of the surface. Red indicators spread across the planetary grid like a living infection. General Kareth of the Thrun stood motionless, mandibles tight. High Strategist Varen of the Saruan leaned heavily on her staff, bioluminescent veins dim. Fleet Master Duver of the Vesh didn't even bother hiding his exhaustion. They had thrown everything at the Dominion. 47 species. 3 combined strike fleets. 7 planetary counter-siege doctrines. All of it had failed. Because the Dominion did not fight wars. It performed eradications. They were not merely soldiers. They were a hive-structured species engineered through centuries of directed evolution. Each unit connected to a central cognitive lattice. Individuality reduced. Error minimized. Fear removed. Every Dominion siege followed the same pattern. Encircle. Isolate. Silence communications. Dismantle defenses. Break morale. Consume territory. They had never lost a planetary siege. Not once. 60 years ago, the Dominion had crossed into Conclave territory. In 60 years, 17 worlds had fallen. Ardentis was meant to be the line. It had been reinforced beyond standard doctrine. Orbital cannons tripled. Ground armor quadrupled. Civilian shelters hardened to military-grade standards. It had not mattered. On the main display, a city flared white. Then disappeared. Fleet Master Duver finally spoke. How long? Operations Commander Illis didn't look away from her console. Dominion ground forces have breached the eastern megacities. Based on advanced speed and remaining resistance. The pause. 72 hours until total planetary collapse. The word collapse felt clinical. It meant extinction. Silence settled again, heavier this time. They were out of fleets. Out of countermeasures. Out of doctrine. General Karetha's claws tightened against the railing. We cannot lose another core world. No one answered him. Because they could. They would. Outside the viewport, another Dominion carrier adjusted position, engines glowing a dull violet as it aligned for atmospheric entry support. The Dominion did not rush. It did not need to. Ardentis would fall on schedule. The chamber doors opened. Admiral Shavek entered quietly. He was older than most present, scales dulled with age, eyes lined by decades of war councils. He did not carry a data slate. He did not need one. Everyone already knew the numbers. He looked at the burning planet for several seconds before speaking. We have one option remaining. The words did not echo. The same. Fleet Master Duver gave a bitter exhale. If you are about to suggest deploying reserve fleets from the Perseus corridor. I am not. Strategist Varen tilted her head slightly. Then what option remains? Shavek turned from the viewport. The humans have offered assistance. The shift in the room was subtle. No shouting. No outrage. Just discomfort. Humans had joined the Conclave 11 cycles ago. A single planet species from the far edge of explored space. Short-lived. Emotional. Adaptable. Industrious, certainly. Their technological growth curve had been impressive. But in galactic terms, they were new. Unseasoned. Untested against something like the Dominion. General Kareth made a low clicking sound. This is not a border skirmish. I am aware, Shavik replied calmly. Strategist Valrin's bioluminescence flickered faintly. What exactly are they offering? Shavik did not immediately answer. He walked toward the central holotable and activated a private transmission record. A single line appeared. Fleet Master Duver leaned forward. How many ships? No fleet. How many divisions? No divisions. A longer silence. How many? Shavik finally looked up. 12. The number hung in the air. It sounded incorrect. Duver actually laughed. Admiral, Ardentis is defended by 3 combined armies and still collapsing. The Dominion has 40,000 ground units on the surface and 3 siege carriers in low orbit. He gestured sharply at the burning world below. And you are telling us 12 humans will make a difference? They are not sending soldiers, Shavik said quietly. The room stilled again. What are they sending? Valrin asked. Shavik's voice did not rise. They are sending their best. Outside, Ardentis burned. Inside, the Conclave command chamber faced a choice no species in its history had ever seriously considered. Trust 12. Or watch another world die. No one in the Conclave chamber needed to be told what the Dominion was. They had lived with it for 60 years the way a body lives with a chronic illness, learning its patterns, its symptoms, its flare-ups, the false hopes, the inevitable relapses. Entire careers had been built around understanding the Dominion. Entire academies dedicated to predicting its next target. Entire religions had begun forming on fringe worlds around the idea that the Dominion was not a species at all, but a punishment written into the galaxy's fabric. Yet for all the analysis, no one had ever managed to stop it. Because the Dominion did not simply invade. It processed. Their soldiers were bred, not born. Shaped in controlled hatcheries where genetics were treated the way other civilizations treated metallurgy, an industrial craft, refined over generations, optimized for output. Each unit emerged with a purpose already engraved into its nervous system. They did not train in the Conclave sense. They were manufactured ready. And each one was connected. Not metaphorically. Literally. Every Dominion soldier carried a neural lattice node implanted along the spinal ridge, a dark vein of living circuitry that linked them to a central intelligence, the matron core, an immense processing organism housed within their siege carriers. The node was not a communicator. It was not a headset or a transmitter. It was a shared mind. Orders did not travel through language. They traveled through thought. The Conclave had tried jamming Dominion communications early in the war. They had flooded the spectrum with noise so thick it turned their own systems unreliable. It had not mattered. The Dominion did not rely on the spectrum. They relied on biology. You could not scramble a reflex. You could not jam instinct. A Dominion assault unit was built like a moving armored plate. Their bodies were dense, compact, reinforced with mineralized bone sheaths that could deflect fragmentation and low-energy plasma. Their limbs ended in claws capable of ripping through hardened steel like it was bark. Their eyes processed multiple spectrums at once: infrared, ultraviolet, magnetic field disturbances. Their hearing could identify breathing patterns through rubble. Even their blood was hostile. A defensive enzyme that coagulated instantly and carried corrosive microspores designed to contaminate wounds in enemy species. They did not feel pain the way other beings did. They felt pressure. They did not experience fear. The concept had been cut out of them generations ago. Not suppressed. Not trained away. Removed. The Dominion called it cleaning the mind. Other species called it blasphemy. And then there were the siege carriers. Ardentis had 3 of them in low orbit. They were not warships in the Conclave sense. They were moving ecosystems, kilometers long, packed with hatcheries, fabrication vats, artillery spines, and the matron core itself, an intelligence older than most civilizations, distributed through living tissue, maintained and expanded across centuries. The core was not a general giving orders. It was an operating system. It did not improvise like a commander. It calculated. The Conclave had once believed that meant the Dominion could be tricked, baited into errors, lured into unfavorable terrain. They had tested dozens of deception doctrines. The Dominion adapted, not emotionally but mathematically. It measured outcomes. It adjusted. It never repeated a mistake the same way twice. When a conclave species learned through pain, it carried scars. When the Dominion learned through pain, it updated. That was why the siege record mattered. 600 years of conquest. Hundreds of worlds taken. And not a single recorded siege failure. Not one case in which a fortified planet had resisted long enough to force withdrawal. Not one instance of a Dominion carrier being destroyed after committing ground forces. The Dominion did not overextend. It did not gamble. It did not chase glory. It did not need to. It always arrived with surplus. Surplus soldiers. Surplus ammunition. Surplus time. The Dominion could afford to grind. The Conclave could not. And that was the quiet truth behind the war. The Conclave was fighting a clock it could not see. Not the clock of battles and fleets, but the clock of population loss, economic collapse, morale fracture. Every world that burned weakened the alliance. Every retreat sparked political fractures. Every casualty report turned into new anti-war factions, new separatist movements, new desperate attempts to negotiate with something that did not negotiate. The conclave chambers' central hollow table displayed Ardentis in layers. Defense grids. Supply routes. Shelter complexes. Civilian density clusters. Troop movement vectors. Every projection was tagged with probability models. Probability of holding the Western continent, 4%. Probability of maintaining orbital defense for another 12 hours, 11%. Probability of saving the capital megacity, 2%. The room's silence wasn't just despair. It was recognition. Recognition that by every rational calculation, the world was already lost. The Allied forces on Ardentis had been formidable. The Thuran armored columns were legendary, massive tracked fortresses with layered plating and kinetic cannons capable of punching through carrier armor. Their crews were disciplined, patient, trained to hold lines that would break other species. The Saarwen artillery platforms were precision nightmares, long-range gravitic launchers that could curve projectiles around terrain and strike moving targets from beyond visual range. Their doctrine was built around attrition, break the enemy before it arrived. The Duvani interceptor fleet had been the Conclave's pride. Fast ships, aggressive pilots, superb sensors. They could punch above their mass, swarm larger targets, shred supply lines. Together, they had believed they could hold Ardentis. Together, they had lasted 48 hours. It wasn't that the Dominion fought better. It was that the Dominion fought differently. Thuran armor formed lines. The Dominion did not waste time on lines. It burrowed beneath them. It sent tunneling units through shattered infrastructure, emerging behind fortifications like insects from soil. It used guided swarms, hundreds of small drones made of living resin that clung to sensor arrays and blinded them. It severed communications with surgical strikes, then advanced while the defenders argued in static. Saarwen artillery fired on predictable patterns. The Dominion learned the pattern by the fifth salvo. Then it stopped presenting targets. It moved through heat-shadowed corridors, under collapsed buildings, inside the dead zones the Saarwen had assumed were empty. It did not need to see the battlefield the way the Conclave did. It simply needed to keep moving. The Duvani fleet tried to establish orbital superiority. The Dominion had not challenged them. It had ignored them. It had landed anyway. Siege carriers did not need the Conclave to stop shooting. They needed the Conclave to run out of energy, out of ammunition, out of pilots. And because they carried fabrication vats, their losses were replaceable. The Conclaves were not. General Kareth stared at the projections, his mandibles trembling slightly. We built this world to endure. Admiral Shavek's voice was soft. The Dominion has been building its method for 600 years. Fleet Master Duver turned sharply toward him. And you believe 12 humans can rewrite 6 centuries? Shavek did not answer immediately. He reached into the holotable controls and pulled up another projection layer, Dominion command structure. Most of it was labeled unknown. That was the other reason the Conclave kept losing. The Dominion's weakness, if it had one, was that its command was internal, protected, buried behind layers of soldiers and living encryption. Conclave intelligence could observe troop movement, fire patterns, logistical flows. But it could not see the mind. You couldn't assassinate a decision you couldn't locate. You couldn't sabotage orders you couldn't intercept. You couldn't shatter morale in an enemy engineered without it. The Dominion was a machine you could only strike from the outside. And striking from the outside had never been enough. Shavek pointed at the command layer on the display. This, he said, is what we have never truly touched. Valrin's bioluminescence brightened faintly. You think humans can? I think, Shavek replied carefully, that humans have spent most of their history fighting enemies that look like themselves. Enemies who think. Enemies who lie. Enemies who adapt. They learned long ago that killing bodies is not always the fastest way to win a war. Duver gave a small, humorless sound. So what do they kill instead? Shavek looked at the burning world again, then back to them. Control, he said. He let the word settle. Outside the viewport, Ardentis continued to burn on schedule. Inside, the conclave chamber began to understand that 12 humans were not arriving to reinforce a front line. They were arriving to touch the thing the conclave had never been able to reach. The mind of the Dominion. And if they succeeded, then for the first time in 60 years, the war would change shape. If they failed? Shavek didn't finish the thought. Because the planet below him was already writing the ending. The conclave did not have a word for the feeling in the chamber after Admiral Shavek said control. It wasn't hope. Hope was bright. Hope was loud. Hope was the kind of emotion younger species carried into wars before they learned what war did to numbers. This was something colder. A last tool found at the bottom of a broken kit. Fleet Master Duver turned away from the holotable and stared through the viewport at Ardentis. The planet's night side burned in streaks and clusters, orange bleeding into the clouds. Every few minutes a bloom of white appeared. Another defense node going up, another shelter complex breached, another square kilometer of civilization erased. He had been in command long enough to know what it looked like when a world crossed the line from defensible to dying. Ardentis was dying. General Karetha's claws scraped lightly along the metal railing as he leaned in. If the humans intend to attempt command disruption, he said slowly, they will need surface access. They will get it, Shavek replied. Valrin's bioluminescent veins flickered. You're speaking as if the Dominion will simply allow a 12-unit insertion. Duver laughed once, sharp and humorless. They won't have to allow it. They won't even notice it. 12 is not a military number. It's an accident. That was the first time anyone had said it aloud. And when it was spoken, the chamber's unease shifted into something more complicated, the discomfort of confronting their own assumptions. Humans were not dismissed because they were incompetent. Humans were dismissed because they were new. Because they hadn't been part of the conclave's long history. Because they hadn't earned ceremonial gravitas. Because their diplomacy was too direct, their humor too casual, their wars too frequent, their emotions too visible. They were also, in the opinion of many elder species, unpredictable. And unpredictable was another word for unsafe. A Sarowan counselor, thin and stiff with age, raised a hand. What exactly have the humans requested in exchange? She asked. Resources? Territory? Political representation? Shavek shook his head. Nothing, he said. That made the chamber even quieter. Duver's voice sharpened. No species offers elite assets for nothing. Shavek did not argue. He reached into the console and brought up the human message again, the one that had arrived 20 hours earlier, marked with urgent priority. The translation sat in clear conclave script across the hollow surface. We can help. We will send a small unit. No fleet required. No support required. We need data. We need access. Approve insertion. No flourish. No negotiation. No speech about shared destiny. Just a statement of capability and a list of requirements. General Kareth made a low sound, almost thoughtful. That message reads like a logistics request. It reads, Varen said carefully, like someone who has already decided what they can do and is simply asking permission to do it. A younger Devani officer seated behind Fleet Master Duverer shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. They haven't fought the Dominion, the officer said quietly. They haven't fought anything like this. Duverer nodded once. Correct. Shavek's eyes remained fixed on the hollow surface. But they have fought, he said. No one interrupted him. They have fought each other. For centuries. In wars so frequent that their history is not measured by peaceful eras but by the intervals between conflicts. They have fought with fleets, with ground forces, with sabotage, with deception, with infiltration. They have fought wars where the goal was not simply to destroy the enemy's army, but to break the enemy's ability to function. Varen's glow dimmed slightly. This is not an endorsement, Admiral. This is a warning. Shavek's mouth tightened. I am aware, he said. The chamber's central display shifted. A new overlay appeared, civilian casualty projections. The numbers were so large they barely looked real. 2 billion lives on Ardentis. Shelter complexes at capacity. Evacuation attempts intercepted. Food and water infrastructure collapsing. Hospitals operating on backup power. In 72 hours, the projections shifted from casualty probability to survivor probability. That number was smaller. That number was the one Shavek had been thinking about since the first day of the siege. General Kareth read the projections and went very still. Fleet Master Duver stared at them, then spoke without looking away. Bring the human unit. Varen turned her head toward him sharply. Fleet Master. We have no fleet to send, Duver cut in. No reserve to deploy. No doctrine left to try. If 12 humans want to walk into hell and attempt the one thing we have never successfully done, touch Dominion Command, then let them. He paused, and something old and bitter moved through his voice. And if they die, they will at least die trying to do something meaningful. No one argued with that, because the alternative was watching a world die while they held meetings. Shavek nodded once, then activated the approval. A security prompt appeared, requiring 3 confirmations from 3 species representatives. General Kareth pressed his claw to the interface. Varen pressed her palm. Fleet Master Duver pressed his signet mark. The prompt cleared. Insertion approved. The room did not celebrate. It simply moved. Personnel began rerouting sensor access. Data vaults were opened. Dominion movement logs were compiled. Maps of Ardentis were layered with heat zones, patrol routes, atmospheric disturbances. The Conclave's best intelligence analysts were assigned to the human unit's incoming briefing. As the room reorganized, Duver leaned slightly toward Shavek. If this fails, he said quietly, it will not just be a tactical defeat. Shavek's eyes stayed on Ardentis. I know. It will change how the Conclave sees humanity. Shavek finally looked at him. Humanity does not seem concerned with how we see them, he said. Duver's mouth twitched slightly, almost a smile. That, he admitted, may be their most dangerous trait. A chime sounded from the station's long-range detection system. An object had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at approximately 2,000 kilometers from Helier. There was no broadcast. No transponder. No running lights. Just a small matte black shape on the sensor grid. One of the sensor officers leaned closer, eyebrows raised. It looks like a shadow, he said. Shavek stood. The council members began to move toward the observation deck windows almost without thinking. The black ship drifted closer, silent as a thought. Only when Helier hailed it with conclave authority did a tight band response return, short, clean, perfectly formatted. Identification, Human Special Operations Transport. Request, Docking Vector. Payload 12. Fleet Master Duver exhaled slowly. 12, he repeated, and the numbers sounded different now. Not absurd, just sharp. Shavek stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back, posture straight despite exhaustion. "Docking vector transmitted," he said. The ship altered course with a precision that made Conclave pilots stare. No correction drift. No hesitation. It moved the way a knife moved when thrown by someone who knew exactly where it would land. General Kareth watched it approach and murmured something in his native tongue. Valrin translated softly, almost against her will. "Either they are very calm or very strange." Shavek didn't answer. Because the truth was, as the matte black transport glided toward the station like a piece of the void made solid, even he could feel it. That pressure at the back of the mind. Not fear. Not yet. Something closer to instinct recognizing a predator. The docking clamps engaged without a sound loud enough to hear through the observation glass. A red indicator switched to green. Airlock cycle initiated. Somewhere in the station's docking bay, 12 humans were about to walk out. And whether the Conclave admitted it or not, every species in that chamber was holding its breath. The docking bay was built for fleets. Warships the size of cities had anchored there. Evacuation barges, troop carriers, dreadnoughts scarred from combat. Helios Station had seen them all. The human transport looked small inside it. Not fragile. Just precise. Matte black from nose to engine housing, it reflected almost no light. No insignias. No decorative markings. No ceremonial color bands. Even its engine glow was subdued, a controlled blue-white instead of the dramatic flares most species favored. It did not look like a symbol. It looked like a tool. Admiral Shavek stood at the edge of the docking floor with a small escort of senior officers. He had not arranged ceremony. He had asked the human liaison whether formal reception protocols were expected. The reply had been immediate. No ceremony required. Send data access credentials. The outer hatch of the transport opened with a soft mechanical hiss. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the first human stepped down the ramp. She was not the largest among them. Not the most heavily armored. But the others adjusted slightly around her, almost unconsciously, the way smaller ships orient around a station. Master Sergeant Darkale. That was the name in the file. She wore layered dark gear, flexible armor panels integrated into fabric that looked built for movement rather than bulk. No capes. No banners. No obvious rank display beyond a small insignia patch at her shoulder. Her eyes moved before her head did. Above. Behind. She wasn't scanning in panic. She was mapping. The 11 behind her followed in pairs, spacing natural, no verbal coordination required. Each carried compact weapons slung low. Equipment packs tight against their backs. No loose straps. No wasted gear. They did not march. They did not swagger. They walked like people already inside a problem. Shavek felt something tighten in his chest. He had reviewed human physiological data. Soft skin. No exoskeleton. No visible biological weapons. No natural armor plating. They looked, in galactic terms, vulnerable. But vulnerability was not the impression they gave. They gave the impression of compression. Like force folded inward. Fleet Master Duver stood slightly behind Shavek, watching the way the human's eyes tracked exits, overhead structures, reflective surfaces. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with pale hair and a trimmed beard, paused near a support column and adjusted his angle slightly to remove a blind spot. No one had briefed them on Helios' internal architecture. They had calculated it on arrival. Master Sergeant Kale reached the bottom of the ramp and stopped at a respectful distance from Shavek. She gave a short nod. "Admiral." Her voice was even. Not deferential. Not arrogant. Professional. Shavek inclined his head slightly. "Master Sergeant." There was a half-second pause. Then Kale spoke again. "We'd like full terrain maps of Ardentis. Dominion force distribution for the last 72 hours. Sensor data on command relay structures. Any signal anomalies you flagged but couldn't classify. As soon as possible. No greeting. No speech about shared alliances. A list." Shavek found himself answering immediately. "You will have it." She nodded once. "Thank you." That was it. No reassurance. No promises. Behind her, one of the humans, shorter, sharp-featured, eyes calculating, was already studying the docking bay ceiling structure. Another had subtly shifted to stand where he could see both the exit corridor and the transport ramp simultaneously. Fleetmaster Duver leaned toward Valrin and murmured quietly, "They don't look confident." Valrin watched the humans adjust their positions without discussion. "They don't look afraid either," she replied. Duver exhaled slowly. "They look busy." The briefing room had been prepared with layered holographic projections of Ardentis. Surface heat maps. Dominion patrol routes. Shelter density. Infrastructure damage. The humans entered and spread naturally around the table without needing direction. Data tablets were passed hand to hand. Two of them began marking on physical paper. Physical paper. General Kareth stared at the sheets for a moment. "Is that decorative?" he asked quietly. One of the humans glanced up briefly, expression neutral. "Redundancy," he said. Then he went back to drawing lines. For 6 hours, they studied. They asked questions, but not many. "What's the update delay on your orbital sensors? Are these patrol routes reactive or pre-programmed? How often do Dominion relay nodes cycle authentication? What's the failure rate of your ground-level thermal arrays?" Targeted. No speculation. At one point, the large bearded human sat cross-legged on the floor, tablet balanced against his knee, eating from a small ration packet while reading heat dispersion patterns. No one commented. No one joked. They were not trying to impress. They were trying to understand. General Kareth stood in the doorway for nearly an hour, watching. He had expected bravado. He had expected either visible anxiety or visible heroism. He saw neither. They did not look like warriors preparing for glory. They looked like engineers diagnosing a system fault. A young Thuran officer, Valash, had been assigned as liaison and observer. His job was to monitor the humans' methods and relay their needs back to Conclave Command. He approached Master Sergeant Kale cautiously during a pause. "What is your operational plan?" he asked. She did not look offended. She did not smile. "We're building it," she said. "From what assumptions?" "We don't plan from assumptions." She tapped the holo display lightly. "We plan from data." The lash hesitated. "And when you have enough?" She paused. "Then we'll know what's possible." "And what isn't?" She looked at him for half a second. "That too." Then she went back to studying Dominion patrol spacing. Valash stepped back and wrote in his internal report. "Observation. They are either very calm or very strange. Possibly both." At the 6-hour mark, Kale straightened. She placed both hands flat on the holo table. Her team's attention shifted toward her instantly. No call to attention. No raised voice. Just awareness. "All right," she said quietly. The room still seemed to sharpen around her. "We know what we're doing." The others began to move. Equipment checks. Secure channel calibrations. Helmet seals adjusted. Small devices passed between gloved hands with the kind of familiarity that comes from repetition, not theory. Shavek stepped forward. "You will require ground support?" "No," Kale said. "Orbital cover?" "No." "Extraction guarantee?" "We'll call when we need it." The simplicity of the answer unsettled him more than defiance would have. Fleetmaster Duver folded his hands behind his back. "You understand what waits for you on Ardentis," he said. Kale met his gaze. "Yes." "And you are not concerned?" She considered the question seriously. "Fear's a tool," she said finally. "We use it." Duver's eyes narrowed slightly. "And the Dominion?" She adjusted her gloves. "They do too," she said. The pause. "They just don't know we do." The black transport detached from Heliar 43 minutes later. It descended toward Ardentis without escort. No fighter screen. No dramatic fleet formation. Just one small, matte black vessel cutting through the smoke of a dying world. On the surface, Dominion siege forces continued their systematic advance. In the Dominion command tent, a sensor operator flagged 12 new human life signs entering the eastern exclusion zone. The report moved up the chain. It reached the siege commander. Designation, Iron Matron. Veteran of 30 planetary eradications. Undefeated. She read the report. 12. No armored support. No fleet cover. Entering ruins alone. She stared at the number for a moment, then dismissed it. 12 was not a threat vector. 12 was a reconnaissance error. 12 was irrelevant. She moved on to more meaningful data. Outside, in the burning ruins of Ardentis' eastern megacity, 12 humans stepped into shadow. And began. The first shot never came. That was what unsettled Valash most. From orbit, he watched the 12 human life signs descend through smoke and broken air traffic corridors, then slip between collapsed towers and shattered transit lines. He had expected movement toward contact. He had expected engagement. Instead, they stopped. Not all at once. Not dramatically. They simply dispersed. 3 groups of 4. No visible signal. No audible command. They reached an intersection choked with debris, and without speaking, they separated. One team moved west through the skeletal remains of a transit station. One climbed into the husk of a residential tower. One slipped into a drainage canal half filled with ash. Then they vanished. Valash leaned closer to his console. Dominion patrol units were sweeping the sector in tight, methodical formations. Thermal arrays active. Motion sensors calibrated to detect even small biological signatures. The Dominion had designed its siege zones to be sterile. Nothing moved without being logged. And yet, twice in the first hour, Dominion patrols passed within 30 meters of a human position without triggering alert. Valash replayed the feed. The human life signs dimmed slightly when patrols approached, then brightened once they moved on. He adjusted sensor thresholds. Ran diagnostics. The readings were clean. They were still there. The Dominion simply wasn't seeing them. He began recording. Observation: human operators are employing movement discipline beyond standard Conclave stealth doctrine. Dominion patrols are failing to detect presence at close proximity. Unknown technique. On the surface, in the ruins of what had once been a financial district, Master Sergeant Kale lay prone beneath a collapsed overhang, watching a Dominion patrol pass. She counted their stride timing in her head. For seconds per cycle. Central unit slightly heavier, probable squad lead. Rear left unit lagging by half a beat, minor structural damage. She didn't raise her weapon. She didn't signal attack. She waited. Behind her, Ghost Reyes adjusted a sensor probe no larger than a coin and slid it into a crack in the pavement. The probe adhered magnetically and began recording environmental frequencies. 2 streets over, Bjorn Haverson crouched beside a shattered service conduit, attaching a thin filament line to a structural support beam. Not a tripwire. A vibration gauge. They were not hunting bodies. They were mapping patterns. For 48 hours, they did not fire a single shot. They watched. They tracked patrol rotations. They recorded the timing of Dominion relay tower pulses. They identified which units carried communication uplinks and which did not. They mapped heat signatures of supply vehicles. They measured delay intervals between field units and command response. They were building something. Not a weapon. A picture. Valash reported what he could. Human units are collecting high-resolution micromovement data. No direct engagement. No visible aggression. General Kareth read the reports and frowned. They are wasting time. Fleet Master Duver shook his head slightly. Or they are refusing to waste it. On the 3rd night, the first deviation occurred. It was small. So small that Valash almost missed it. Dominion Patrol Group Theta 17 altered course at an intersection in Sector East 4. Not sharply. Not urgently. They simply diverted. Valash rewound the feed. 5 seconds before the diversion, a sound registered on Dominion sensors, low-frequency structural shift. Probable building instability. Protocol required investigation. Theta 17 adjusted. They moved away from their original route. While they were gone, something happened. Valash's eyes flicked across the sensor grid. A Dominion communication relay node, Relay E4, Delta, went offline. Not destroyed. Not exploded. Offline. No heat spike. No debris. Just silence. 2 minutes later, it came back online. Operational. Normal. The lash flagged it. 3 hours later, a Dominion field commander on the western flank received a direct command authentication from the Iron Matron herself. The signal was flawless. Correct encryption pattern. Correct identity markers. Correct authority stamp. The order instructed him to reposition his unit 300 meters south to reinforce an expected incursion. He complied immediately. The area he vacated was left unguarded for 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, a small human life sign moved through it. The lash froze. He replayed the authentication log. Compared it to previous command packets. They were identical. He checked the timestamp. It was valid. He checked the Matron Core transmission record. No such order had been issued. The lash felt something cold slide through him. He opened a channel to Admiral Shavik. "Admiral," he said carefully, "the humans are not engaging Dominion forces." Shavik's voice was steady. "Then what are they doing?" The lash swallowed. "They are making the Dominion fight itself." On the surface, Kale watched the diversion unfold through a secure wrist display. "Relay compromised," Ghost murmured. 2-minute window achieved. Bjorn adjusted the filament line he had placed earlier. Western patrol gap confirmed. Kale nodded once. "Keep pushing." There were no cheers. No fist bumps. Just confirmation. That night, 3 additional Dominion patrol routes shifted without clear cause. 2 supply convoys arrived at incorrect staging points. A sensor tower began reporting minor atmospheric anomalies that did not exist. None of it was catastrophic. None of it drew immediate alarm. But each deviation required Dominion recalculation. Each recalculation required data flow. And data flow was something the humans were now inside. By the 4th day, the Iron Matron noticed. Not because of a single event. Because of accumulation. Patrol efficiency dropped by 3%. Response times increased by 2. Supply synchronization showed microlags. Her central mind did not feel confusion. It felt inconsistency. Inconsistency was unacceptable. She ordered a review. Every command packet. Every relay fluctuation. Every field anomaly. Her intelligence officers worked for 12 hours without pause. They found nothing overt. No explosions. No mass casualties. No large-scale sabotage. Just wrongness. Persistent. Like a gear misaligned by a fraction of a tooth. The Iron Matron stood very still in her command structure. "Full security lockdown," she ordered. All authentication double-verified. Patrol routes randomized. Assume infiltration. Her officers complied. On the surface, Kale received the change in Dominion behavior before the lockdown was fully implemented. Her listening probe attached to a relay conduit pulsed softly against Ghost's palm. "Security protocol shift," he said. "Matron's tightening." Bjorn cracked his neck slightly. She noticed. Kale's eyes never left her display. She would. The lash watched the Dominion response with growing unease. "They are adapting," he said to Shavik. "They always do." Shavik's gaze remained on the planetary projection. "And the humans?" The lash hesitated. "They're already moving again." On the 5th night, something happened that would be replayed in Conclave war colleges for decades. At 0300 local surface time, a single human life sign appeared inside the innermost Dominion command perimeter. The lash's breath caught. That perimeter was layered. Ground sensors. Aerial sweeps. Thermal grids. Centralized patrol overlap. No Conclave unit had ever breached it undetected. Yet there it was. One human life sign. In sight. He ran a system diagnostic. No malfunction. He zoomed in. The life sign moved slowly. Deliberately. Pausing at corners. Avoiding patrol vectors by margins so tight they looked impossible. 40 minutes later, it stopped outside the primary command structure, the Iron Matron's own operational core. It remained there for 3 minutes. Then it left. Exited through the same layered defenses. Untouched. The lash sat back in his chair. He felt something that had nothing to do with fear of the Dominion. He opened a channel. "Admiral," he said quietly, "we may no longer be observing a siege." Shavek's voice was calm. "What are we observing?" Valash watched the lone life sign slip back into the city ruins. He did not look away when he answered. "We are observing surgery." On the surface, the human who had entered the perimeter rejoined Kale's team. He removed a device no larger than a fingertip from a pouch and nodded once. "Bugs live." Kale exhaled softly. "Good." The device adhered to the exterior wall of the matron's command structure. Over the next 72 hours, it would record every vibration, every internal order, every shift in tone, and transmit it in compressed bursts during the exact microseconds when Dominion communication arrays cycled frequency. They were no longer guessing at Dominion intention. They were reading it. Above Ardentis, Valash stared at the feed. The Dominion had not lost a single siege in 600 years. And for the first time since the war began, something inside its machine was being touched. Not by fleets. Not by armies. By 12. By the 6th day, the Iron Matron no longer dismissed the anomaly. She did not have fear. That had been engineered out of her kind centuries ago. But she had something adjacent to it. Signal deviation. The siege of Ardentis was still progressing. 40,000 Dominion ground units maintained territorial control across 3 major continents. Orbital dominance remained intact. Civilian populations were contained within shrinking zones. On paper, the operation was within acceptable parameters. And yet, response latency had increased by 3.7%. Logistical synchronization was off by measurable margins. Command packets required double verification and still produced minor inconsistencies. Worse, the intelligence officer assigned to anomaly tracking had been found in his chamber at the beginning of the 6th rotation. Alive. Uninjured. Non-functional. He was seated against the wall, knees drawn close, emitting a low repetitive sound that did not match any known Dominion communication protocol. He did not respond to neural prompts. He did not access the lattice. He simply rocked. The medics found no physical damage. The matron core found no corrupted code. And yet he could not be redeployed. The Iron Matron stood over the report for a long time. She did not assign emotion to the event. She assigned cause. And the only new variable inside the siege zone was 12 human life signs. She did not underestimate 12 anymore. She escalated. 3 Dominion transport vessels detached from high orbit and entered atmospheric descent on tight vector alignment. Their holds carried something the Dominion rarely deployed. Not because it was ineffective. Because it was excessive. The Shriek cast. They were not frontline soldiers. They were not siege laborers. They were not tactical coordinators. They were specialists, engineered for one purpose: to hunt thinking prey. The Shriek cast were taller than standard Dominion units, their bodies elongated, joints inverted at unnatural angles that allowed sudden directional shifts without warning. Their dermal plates were thinner, sacrificing some durability for speed and sensitivity. Their skull structures were narrow and elongated, housing expanded auditory chambers capable of detecting biological rhythms through solid structures. They could hear heartbeats through walls. They could hear breath inside rubble. They could hear hesitation. But their true weapon was not physical. Deep within their thoracic cavity, they possessed a modified organ cluster capable of generating subsonic resonance waves. Low-frequency emissions. Inaudible to most species as sound. Felt instead as terror. Not fear. Not adrenaline. Terror. The shriek emission did not persuade the mind. It bypassed it. It triggered the oldest survival circuits in biological nervous systems. The reflex that said run or freeze before thought could intervene. Conclave Behavioral Institutes had studied captured data from previous Shriek cast encounters. The reports were not optimistic. Entire platoons abandoning fortified positions without direct combat. Pilots ejecting from functioning aircraft. Trained officers dropping weapons and covering their heads as if from invisible predators. Drugs had been tested. Training adaptations attempted. Neural dampeners deployed. None reliably suppressed the effect. The official Conclave recommendation read: Shriek cast encounters are to be avoided. Engagement is not advised. When Valash saw the atmospheric signatures of 3 Dominion transports descending in tight formation, he felt his fur lift instinctively. He pulled up cargo analysis. He did not need full confirmation. He recognized the profile. He opened an immediate channel. "Sergeant Kale," he said carefully, "Dominion reinforcements inbound. Classification suggests Shriek cast deployment." There was a brief pause. "I was expecting that," Kale replied. Valash blinked. "You were expecting it?" Matron's escalation pattern fits. When standard command structure destabilizes, she'll deploy specialists. Another pause. "We'll move underground." Valash hesitated. "You are aware of Conclave advisory regarding Shriek cast engagement?" A moment of silence on the line. "Yes. That advisory recommends avoidance." "We appreciate the concern," Kale said. The channel closed. Valash stared at the silent comm panel for several seconds. Then he began composing a preliminary casualty projection. On the surface, the 12 humans moved. They did not sprint. They did not panic. They relocated. The underground tunnel network beneath Ardentis' eastern megacity had once been infrastructure, water transit lines, maglev transport channels, emergency evacuation corridors. Now it was dark. Power grid destroyed. Lighting dead. Stone walls coated in ash. It was the worst possible environment to face Shriek cast. Confined space. Echo amplification. No clear exit routes. Exactly why the Dominion would choose it. The Shriek cast landed at dusk. 12 of them. Equal number. A message. The Iron Matron did not believe in symbolism, but she understood psychological effect. 12 hunters. For 12 infiltrators. The Shriek cast entered the tunnels without hesitation. They did not require light. They did not require coordination speech. Their neural lattice linked them. They spread in silent formation, elongated limbs bending around corners, bodies low, heads tilted slightly as they listened. They could already hear something. Heartbeats. Slow. Controlled. 12 of them. In orbit, Valash watched the sensor grid light up. Dominion Shriek cast life signs moving underground. Human life signs stationary. 3 clusters. For an each. Waiting. His throat tightened. "Admiral," he said quietly. Shavek stepped behind him. "Yes. They're not retreating." "No," Shavek said softly. "They aren't." In the tunnels, darkness pressed like weight. Bjorn Haverson adjusted the seal on his helmet and rolled his shoulders once. Ghost Reyes checked a small device clipped near his collar. Yeva Morozova closed her eyes for a second, regulating her breathing pattern. Master Sergeant Kale listened. Not for sound. For rhythm. Then it began. At first, Valash thought his equipment was malfunctioning. A low tremor in the audio feed. A vibration that made the sensor array hum. The Shriek cast had opened their thoracic cavities. They emitted. The sound did not register as audible. It registered as pressure. In orbit, Valash felt it faintly through filtered data. On the surface, in the tunnels, it hit the humans directly. Heart rate spiked. Cortisol levels surged. Adrenaline flooded. Every biological survival system activated. Hide. Freeze. The Shriek cast advanced. They expected movement. They expected collapse. They expected prey. The human life signs did not move. Valash stared at the biometric feed. Elevated heart rates. Elevated stress markers. But position unchanged. He leaned closer. "They're feeling it," he whispered. Shavek nodded once. "Yes." In the tunnels, Bjorn's breath came faster. He felt the instinct clawing at him. The urge to move. To escape. To find light. Ghost's hands trembled for half a second before he tightened his grip. Yeva's pulse hammered in her ears. Kale spoke calm and low. "Label it." It was not an order shouted. It was a reminder. Bjorn forced air through his lungs slowly. "Induced response," he muttered. Ghost swallowed hard. "Artificial trigger." Yeva's jaw tightened. "Tool." The shriek intensified. Walls vibrated. Dust fell from the ceiling. Valash braced instinctively even from orbit. The humans did not run. They did not collapse. They moved. Not toward the shriek cast. Around them, Velash's audio feed picked up fragmented sounds. Metallic clicks. Brief bursts of compressed air. Low, controlled noises that did not match weapons discharge. 11 minutes. That was how long the emission lasted. It stopped. Not gradually. Not fading. Stopped. As if power had been cut. Velash felt the absence like a physical hole in the data stream. He scanned the tunnel grid. All 12 shriek-cast life signs were still active. Clustered. Stationary. Human life signs moving. Methodical. 6 hours passed. The humans emerged at the eastern tunnel exit as dawn light filtered weakly through smoke. They were covered in dark fluid. Dominion blood. Their biometrics showed minor strain. No critical injuries. Bjorn stepped into the gray morning light and began humming softly to himself. Velash stared. He opened the channel. "Sergeant, are you able to report?" "We're good," Kale replied. 12 up, 12 down. Velash checked the tunnel feed. The shriek-cast were alive. But not moving. Not emitting. Not responding to neural prompts. "What did you do?" he asked before he could stop himself. There was a long pause. "We found out what they were afraid of," Kale said. The channel closed. In the Dominion command structure, the Iron Matron received confirmation. All 12 shriek-cast alive. All 12 non-functional. She stood motionless for a full 30 seconds. Then she issued an order no matron had issued in over 2 centuries. Recall all shriek-cast deployments across Dominion space. It was an admission. A signal. A shift. In orbit, Velash leaned back slowly. "They broke them," he whispered. Shavek did not correct him. Because breaking the shriek-cast did not mean killing them. It meant something worse. It meant that for the first time in 600 years, the Dominion's ultimate terror weapon had encountered something that did not behave like prey. And the siege of Ardentis had just changed shape. The recall order did not go unnoticed. Across Dominion-controlled space, shriek-cast units were withdrawn mid-operation. Hunters pulled from tunnels. Specialists extracted from urban purges. A weapon that had never failed was suddenly being shelved. Conclave intelligence detected the pattern within hours. The reaction in Helier's command chamber was not celebration. It was calculation. Fleet Master Duver stared at the strategic overlay of Ardentis. "The Dominion just admitted vulnerability," he said quietly. Shavek shook his head. "No," he replied. "They admitted risk." On the surface of Ardentis, the 12 humans did not celebrate either. They relocated. They ate. They cleaned their equipment. Then they went back to work. The listening device on the Iron Matron's command structure was now delivering something more valuable than raw vibration data. It was delivering intent. Every shift in patrol distribution. Every alteration in authentication protocol. Every emergency countermeasure. The humans were no longer reacting to Dominion movement. They were anticipating it. Kale stood over a hollow projection inside the shell of a collapsed library. Dust motes drifted through broken skylights as faint morning light filtered in. "The matron's consolidating," Ghost said, reviewing incoming data bursts. "She's pulling 3 outer sectors inward." Bjorn nodded slowly. "She's tightening the fist." "She's scared," Yeva said quietly. Kale didn't correct the phrasing. "She's cautious," Kale replied instead. "Which means she's about to make efficient decisions." "That's bad," Bjorn said. "It's predictable," Kale answered. That was all they needed. In orbit, Velash watched Dominion units begin a staged retreat from the outermost eastern districts. Not a rout. Not a collapse. A tactical repositioning. 40,000 units compressing into tighter formations. Defensive core strengthened. Perimeter drawn inward to reduce exposure. It was a textbook response to infiltration. And it should have worked. Except the humans already knew the retreat vectors. They knew the new patrol assignments before they were transmitted. They knew which supply corridors would become critical choke points. They knew which communication nodes would handle increased traffic under consolidation. They had 72 hours of the Iron Matron's voice. And that voice had become a map. The first domino fell quietly. A Dominion supply convoy moving along Route Kappa 12 received updated navigation markers, perfectly authenticated. The markers redirected the convoy through an alternate path, avoiding what appeared to be structural instability ahead. The instability had been real. The alternate path had been altered. By the time the convoy reached its corrected coordinates, it had added 3 hours to its transit. 3 hours without energy resupply to frontline units. 3 hours of reduced operational tempo. On its own, negligible. Stacked with other deviations, critical. 2 hours later, a communications hub at the center of the Dominion consolidation zone went offline. Not destroyed. Not attacked. Its primary load-bearing relay had been replaced with a component identical in structure but engineered to fail under peak traffic. When retreating units attempted synchronized repositioning through the hub, it failed. For 6 hours. Orders backed up. Authentication requests looped. Field commanders operated on stale data. Vlash watched the network visualization fracture. He had studied Dominion doctrine for years. He had never seen fragmentation like this. "They're bleeding," he murmured. Shavek didn't answer. Because this wasn't bleeding. This was infection. On the ground, the 12 moved like shadows between cracks. They did not engage massed formations. They did not attempt heroics. They targeted seams. A route marker shifted by 6 degrees. A bridge integrity sensor flagged incorrectly. A patrol path extended by 90 meters to verify anomaly. Each action was tiny. Each action was deniable. Together, they compounded. By the end of the second day of consolidation, Dominion units were arriving at designated regroup points at staggered intervals instead of synchronized. Communication between columns lagged. Trust between unit leaders thinned. Not emotionally. Operationally. And in a hive-structured species, operational trust was oxygen. The Iron Matron stood within her command chamber, processing reports. Units failing to arrive on schedule. Authentication discrepancies still occurring despite double verification. Supply chain degradation. The humans had not launched a mass assault. They had not triggered open battle. And yet her siege structure was losing coherence. She initiated a full internal audit. Every command packet cross-checked against core emission logs. Every relay node scanned for foreign intrusion. Every field officer interrogated through neural link. Nothing obvious surfaced, which meant the interference was precise, deliberate, and embedded. For the first time in her long operational life, the Iron Matron considered a scenario outside her models. Not defeat, but destabilization. The difference mattered. Dominion doctrine was built on superiority through scale and inevitability. Destabilization eroded inevitability. On Ardentis' third day of consolidation, the staged retreat broke. Not dramatically. There was no explosion that signaled the shift. It happened when 3 Dominion columns attempting to merge at Sector Delta arrived at mismatched times. One column arrived 2 hours early. One arrived 3 hours late. The third had been redirected twice by conflicting authentication signals and was still rerouting. Without full synchronization, the perimeter gap between them widened. A Conclave orbital artillery battery, previously suppressed, received temporary sensor clarity through the interference cascade. It fired. The strike was not massive, but it was well placed. Dominion units adjusted. But the adjustment required new orders. New authentication. New recalibration. The infection deepened. Vlash watched the strategic map change color. Not from green to red. From solid to fractured. "What are they doing?" he whispered. Shavek answered quietly. "They're removing the Dominion's certainty." On the surface, Bjorn checked a data burst and gave a low whistle. "They're tripping over their own feet now." Ghost nodded. "They're overcorrecting." Yeva looked toward Kale. "We push." Kale studied the projected retreat paths. "No," she said. "They're about to extract." As if summoned by her words, Dominion orbital carriers shifted position. Extraction vectors activated. 40,000 ground units began emergency withdrawal toward landing zones. The siege of Ardentis was over. Not because the Dominion had been defeated in open battle, But because holding the planet now cost more than abandoning it, the Iron Matron watched the retreat unfold. She did not issue a public declaration. She did not broadcast defeat. She transmitted a message. Not to the Conclave. Not to Ardentis. To 12 encrypted human channels. The cipher was old, reserved for adversaries the Dominion deemed worthy of record. In Helior's command chamber, it took Valash 4 hours to break it. Not because it was complex. Because it had not been used in centuries. When he decoded the message and displayed it before Shavek and Duva, the chamber fell silent. The message was brief. We name you. We will remember you. Do not follow US home. Fleet Master Duva read it twice. Then a third time. They're asking, he said slowly. Yes, Shavek replied. They are. Below them, the 12 humans were already moving toward their extraction point. They did not know the Dominion had acknowledged them. They did not know the Conclave chamber had erupted in stunned disbelief. They were checking gear, counting ammunition, confirming positions. Bjorn finished a ration pack and folded the empty wrapper carefully into a pocket. He began humming again. So, tuneless, unbothered. Valash stared at the sensor feed showing the retreating Dominion fleet. 40,000 units leaving a planet they could have held through brute force. He looked at the 12 human life signs walking calmly through ruins they had helped save. They feared the wrong thing, he murmured. Shavek tilted his head. Who? Valash's eyes stayed on the 12. The Dominion feared armies. He paused. They should have feared 12. The Conclave chamber had not been this loud in 60 years. Not since the first Dominion fleet had crossed the border and reduced a colony world to ash in 3 days. That had been the sound of fear. This was something else. Relief. Disbelief. Calculation. Unease. The hololithic projection of Ardentis no longer glowed with advancing red zones. Dominion fleet signatures were lifting out of orbit in clean, efficient arcs. Extraction complete. Siege terminated. Terminated voluntarily. That word alone was historic. Fleet Master Duver raised a hand, and the chamber's layered voices gradually settled. Admiral Shavek stood at the front, posture straight despite exhaustion carved into his scales. Before we discuss what this means, he said, we need to understand what happened. He turned slightly. Officer Valash. Valash had not slept. He stepped forward with a data slate in hand, fur still faintly raised along his arms. He had spent the last 2 rotations assembling something more than a battle report. He had titled it carefully. What exactly are human special forces? It was not a normal title for a military document. Reports were supposed to provide answers. This one provided context. He began. Over 11 days, Valash said, voice steady despite the weight of eyes on him, 12 human operators engaged Dominion siege forces on Ardentis. He paused. They did not engage in conventional warfare. A new projection appeared behind him, time-lapse overlays of patrol routes shifting, supply corridors misaligning, command packets looping. They targeted control structures, Valash continued. Authentication systems. Relay nodes. Decision-making layers. He shifted to the Shriek-cast encounter. The Dominion deployed a specialized terror unit with a documented history of battlefield paralysis across multiple species. Conclave advisories recommend avoidance. Another pause. The humans did not avoid. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Valash did not look away from his text. They endured the Shriek emission. Biometric readings confirm elevated stress responses consistent with severe autonomic activation. They were not immune. He let that settle. They functioned anyway. Silence deepened. They disrupted the Shriekcast's operational capacity without terminating life signs. 12 Dominion specialist units remain alive but non-functional. Valash shifted projection layers again. This time, Dominion consolidation breakdown. Following the Shriekcast neutralization, the human team leveraged intercepted command data to anticipate Dominion countermeasures before implementation. They manipulated supply vectors, communication timing, and retreat corridors. He inhaled once. They removed synchronization. A Duvani counselor leaned forward. You're describing tactical competence. Valash nodded slightly. Yes. He deactivated the battlefield overlays. Then he activated a different dataset. Human military structure. It was larger than most in the chamber had ever examined closely. Branch divisions. Training pipelines. Selection programs. Human special forces, Valash said carefully, are selected from their broader military population through attrition processes that eliminate between 80 and 95% of candidates. A faint stir moved through the chamber. He continued. In some units, out of 100 candidates, fewer than 5 complete qualification. He paused deliberately. These are not ceremonial positions. They are operational filters. Athuran Elder tilted his head. For what purpose? Valash looked up from his slate for the first time. To find individuals who can operate in environments that break others. The chamber grew very quiet. He resumed. Selected individuals undergo years of additional training. Infiltration. Psychological operations. Survival under extreme deprivation. Asymmetric warfare. Counter-command targeting. He let that phrase linger. Counter-command targeting. They are trained not merely to defeat enemy units, Valash said, but to dismantle enemy certainty. Behind him, the projection shifted to a visual of Dominion synchronization collapse on Ardentis. They did not destroy 40,000 soldiers. They made 40,000 soldiers unable to function as a single organism. Asaruan counselor's bioluminescence dimmed slightly. And how many of these individuals exist? Valash consulted the final section of his report. Across known human special operations branches, he said slowly, there are several thousand operators with comparable qualification levels, with varying specialization. A ripple of sound moved through the chamber. Behind them, Valash continued, stand tens of millions of regular human military personnel. He closed his slate. The Dominion fought 12. He let the silence stretch. They have not met the rest. Fleet Master Duver folded his hands behind his back. And the message? He asked. Valash activated the decoded transmission. We name you. We will remember you. Do not follow US home. It was addressed directly to the 12, Valash said. Not to the Conclave. Not to planetary government. Not to Fleet Command. He looked around the chamber. The Dominion acknowledged individuals. That sentence carried more weight than any casualty report. The Dominion did not acknowledge individuals. It consumed species. A Duvani strategist spoke, voice dry and precise. We have been afraid of the wrong humans. No one contradicted him. Because the fear had been subtle. Not of violence. Of unpredictability. Of emotional volatility. Of youth. Now the fear was different. Structured. Measured. If 12 could do this, what could 100 do? What could 1,000? What would happen if humanity ever decided the conclave itself required destabilization? Admiral Shavek watched the expressions around the chamber carefully. He had expected relief. He saw something else rising. Respect. And caution. Humanity did not request territory, he said quietly. They did not request political leverage. They requested data. He let that settle. They saved Ardentis because they believed it needed saving. Fleet Master Duver's gaze hardened slightly. And because they were capable. Yes, Shavek agreed. And because they were capable. In orbit above Ardentis, the small matte black transport detached from the extraction platform. The 12 were aboard. No ceremony. No speeches. Valash had been at the extraction point. He had watched them emerge from the ruins, gear marked with Dominion blood, movements controlled but visibly tired. He had asked Master Sergeant Kale one question before she boarded. How do you carry it? He had asked. Everything you've seen and done. She had considered the question seriously. We don't carry it, she had said. We put it down between jobs. That answer now echoed in his mind as he stood before the conclave chamber. These were not machines. They were not immune to fear. They simply had tools. Tools to label it. Tools to compartmentalize it. Tools to pick it up when necessary and set it down when not. The Dominion had built soldiers by removing fear. Humanity had built soldiers by mastering it. That difference was not small. It was structural. The chamber remained quiet long after Valash finished speaking. Outside, Ardentis rotated slowly beneath the station, scarred but alive. And somewhere in Dominion space, in a temple carved from black stone, 12 new marks were being etched into a wall reserved not for conquered enemies, but for those who had made the Dominion stop. There was a place in Dominion space where the air did not move. It was not a command center, not a hatchery, not a warship. It was older than most of the matrons alive. A temple carved into the basalt heart of a dead world. The Dominion did not worship in the conclave sense. It did not pray. It did not ask for mercy or favor from unseen forces. But it remembered. And it recorded. The temple walls were black stone, etched with markings that spiraled inward toward a central chamber. Each carving represented a campaign that had required adjustment. Not worlds taken easily. Not species erased without friction. The difficult ones. The ones that had forced the Dominion to recalibrate. Most of the carvings were large. Entire civilizations reduced to symbols representing resistance broken, fleets destroyed, strategies countered. They were trophies of adaptation. But there was another section. Smaller. Not displayed prominently. Carved deeper into the rock. These were not trophies. They were warnings. Species that had not been fully conquered. Opponents that had inflicted disproportionate cost. Entities that required caution. The Dominion did not forget them. On the third rotation after withdrawal from Ardentis, a carving tool hummed against the stone. The Iron Matron herself observed. Not because she felt ritual significance, but because she understood what it meant. The tool etched 12 marks. Not a single symbol. Not a species designation. 12. Placed side by side. Equal spacing. Precise. The Dominion had named them. The name would not be spoken publicly. It would be stored in the lattice. Referenced in future calculations. The message transmitted to the 12 humans had not been emotional. It had been strategic. Do not follow US home. It was not a plea. It was a recognition of capability. Across Dominion space, the recall of Shriek-cast units continued. Research divisions began analyzing their failure on Ardentis. Neural scans of the incapacitated specialists yielded no corruption. They were alive. But something fundamental in their internal structure had been disrupted. The Dominion had engineered fear out of itself. The humans had reached into that absence and found leverage. The Iron Matron processed the reports. Then she initiated something rare. A new model branch in the Dominion's predictive war simulations. Humanity, classified as asymmetric destabilization species. Not superior in scale. Not superior in fleet mass. Superior in unpredictability under constraint. In Helier Station, the conclave chamber was quieter now. Celebration had passed. What remained was recalibration. Trade representatives whispered urgently inside chambers. Military strategists requested full copies of Valash's report. Political factions debated what this meant for human representation within the alliance. Because one fact could not be ignored. Humanity had changed the war's geometry. For 60 years, the Dominion had advanced in straight lines. Now there was a curve. On fringe worlds far from Ardentis, news traveled faster than official briefings. 12 humans. 40,000 Dominion soldiers. Shriek cast broken. Voluntary retreat. Stories condensed and simplified as they spread. Details blurred. But one image remained consistent in every retelling. A human soldier emerging from darkness, covered in Dominion blood, humming softly in the morning light. The galaxy did not know what to do with that image. It did not fit the narrative of brutal conquest. It did not fit the narrative of desperate survival. It was casual, as if dismantling a 600-year war machine was just another task on a list. In the human transport moving quietly between stars, the 12 were not discussing the conclave chamber. They were not discussing the Dominion Temple. They were not discussing their place in galactic myth. Bjorn lay strapped into his seat, eyes closed, actually sleeping this time. Ghost reviewed maintenance logs for equipment wear. Yeva stretched her shoulders slowly, precise and methodical. Master Sergeant Kale sat alone for a moment, reviewing after-action notes. Not strategic analysis. Personal observations. Where response timing had lagged by a fraction of a second. Where shriek emission intensity had peaked. Where Dominion adaptation had nearly caught them off guard. There would be another job. There was always another job. She saved the notes, closed the display, and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of stillness. Not reflection. Recovery. Then she stood and walked toward the galley compartment. Bjorn was awake again. He looked at her and grinned faintly. "Next time," he said, voice still rough from sleep, "maybe fewer underground monsters." Kale raised an eyebrow. "You volunteering to tell command that?" Bjorn considered. "No." Ghost glanced up from his equipment. "They'll deploy something worse next time." "Probably," Yeva said calmly. Bjorn shrugged. "Good." They fell into quiet conversation about food. About whose turn it was to run physical training drills during transit. About whether Bjorn's humming technically violated noise discipline protocols. The galaxy outside the hull remained vast and complicated and full of threats. Inside, 12 humans argued mildly about ration flavors. And in that contrast lay the part that unsettled the Conclave most. Not their violence. Not their skill. Their normalcy. They did not look transformed by what they had done. They looked like professionals between assignments. Back on Ardentis, civilian recovery operations began. Infrastructure teams descended into damaged water systems. Engineers sealed unstable tunnel sections. Medical units treated survivors emerging from shelters. Life returned slowly, painfully. But it returned. Valash stood at the edge of the Eastern Tunnel Network one evening as recovery crews worked. He looked into the darkness where Shriekcast had once hunted. He tried to imagine the moment the humans had found out what they were afraid of. He could not. Perhaps that was the point. Some weapons were best left undescribed. Above him, the sky was no longer full of Dominion carriers. Stars were visible again. And somewhere, far beyond sight, a Dominion matron was recalculating a future that now contained a new variable. Humanity had not destroyed the Dominion. It had not won the war. But it had done something perhaps more important. It had introduced doubt. And doubt, once seated, spreads. In the Temple of Black Stone, the 12 marks remained. Not large. Not grand. But carved deeply enough to last centuries. The Dominion would remember them. The Conclave would remember them. And long after Ardentis scars faded into history, the story would persist. Humanity sent 12. 40,000 left. And one of the 12 had been humming. Wars rarely end in silence. They end in treaties, or annihilation, or exhaustion so complete that no one remembers why the first shot was fired. The siege of Ardentis ended in something stranger. It ended in recalculation. 3 weeks after Dominion withdrawal, the planet still smelled faintly of ash. Reconstruction drones moved across broken skylines like patient insects. Water systems were being repressurized. Transit lines repaired. Shelter complexes opened to daylight for the first time in days. 2 billion lives had not been saved untouched. But they had been saved. In the eastern megacity, a temporary monument had been erected near the old tunnel network entrance. Not grand. Not ornate. A simple obelisk of polished minerals salvaged from collapsed towers. It bore no names. The Conclave had debated that. Should they list the 12? Should they honor them publicly? Human diplomatic channels had responded quickly. No monument required. Ardentis' standing is sufficient. So the obelisk carried only a single line. The siege broke here. No one mentioned how. Because no one fully understood how. In Helior Station's strategic archives, Valash's report circulated among analysts and military theorists. It became required study for senior command candidates. Not because it glorified humanity, because it reframed war. For 60 years, the Conclave had believed that to defeat the Dominion, it would require greater fleets. Larger armies. Stronger fortifications. Ardentis proved something else. You did not need to outmatch inevitability. You needed to disrupt it. Human special forces were not miracle workers. They were not immune to fear. They were not invincible. They were disciplined, trained to function under the weight that crushed others, trained to think inside chaos without becoming it. The Dominion had engineered fear out of itself. Humanity had engineered resilience into itself. That difference was now part of the war's equation. Months later, when Dominion scouts probed another Conclave border world, they did so cautiously. Patrol patterns were tighter, authentication protocols deeper, shriek-cast deployments rarer. The Dominion had not retreated from expansion, but it no longer advanced blindly. The 12 had changed that. In a quiet chamber on Earth, far from Ardentis, far from Dominion space, a different kind of report was being read. Master Sergeant Dar Kale stood before a small review panel. No cameras. No applause. Just senior officers and a digital recorder. Assessment? One of them asked. Mission objectives achieved, Kale said simply. Dominion adaptive capacity? High. They'll compensate. Shriek-cast countermeasure viability? Effective for now. The officer leaned back slightly. And if they develop resistance? Kale didn't hesitate. Then we'll develop something else. No arrogance. No drama. Just logistics. After the debrief, she stepped outside into open air. Earth's sky was clear that evening. No burning planets. No orbital carriers. Just clouds moving slowly in sunlight. Bjorn was already there, leaning against a railing, humming quietly as usual. You think they'll call again? He asked without turning. They will, Kale said. He nodded once. Good. Ghost emerged from the building behind them, scrolling through training schedules. 3 new candidates washed out this week, he said. Selection rates holding steady. Yeva joined them last, carrying a thermos. Attrition's the point, she said. Kale watched a transport aircraft cross the horizon. 12 out of hundreds. Hundreds out of millions. Humanity did not send its armies first. It sent its questions. And when questions failed, it sent 12. Across the galaxy, the story of Ardentis spread in simplified fragments. Some told it as legend. Some as warning. Some as propaganda. But the core remained consistent. The Dominion had never lost a planetary siege. Until 12 humans arrived. In the Dominion Temple, the 12 marks remained in the section reserved for lessons. New recruits to the matron corps were shown that wall. They were told, these are the ones who made us adjust. These are the ones who reached inside the machine. Remember them. Not with hatred. With caution. Back on Ardentis, children returned to rebuilt schools. Markets reopened in reduced form. Life reassembled itself in stubborn, imperfect layers. And sometimes, when recovery crews worked near the old tunnels, they claimed they could still hear something faint in the wind. Not a shriek. A hum. So, almost tuneless. It became part of the myth. Humanity did not roar. It did not threaten. It did not boast. It went into the dark. Did what needed doing. Came back out. And had lunch. The war with the Dominion was far from over. No treaties had been signed. No borders redrawn. But something fundamental had shifted in the black between stars. The Dominion had encountered a species that did not rely on inevitability. The Conclave had encountered a species it had misunderstood. And humanity had demonstrated something the galaxy would take generations to fully process. It was not the biggest, not the oldest, not the most numerous. But when the math broke, it sent 12. And the universe, for the first time in 600 years, adjusted.